Hello, and thank you for being with me again. This week I wanted to talk about that question that Jesus put to his disciples and what it means when he said to them, "Who do the people say I am?" And they replied, some say John the Baptist, some say one of the prophets, and so on. But then he says, "And who do you say I am?" And this is a very interesting question to meditate on, and I thought today I would attempt to reply who I say Jesus is, because of course each of us have to say for ourselves. And in doing so, I want to preface that by saying, obviously there'd be a myriad of things that I won't cover, because it's rather like trying to talk about someone that you know well, that is close to you. And if someone asks you who they are and to describe them, it's sometimes really difficult to put into words. However, who do I say Jesus is? And then I would urge you to think who you say Jesus is. For me, Jesus is God, come down on earth to show us how to live. And so he's the one who set all of this in motion, knows exactly how it should work, and comes to show us how that should be. What shows who Jesus is for us is how we apply what he told us. Because if, as I say I do, I believe that Jesus is God, well, it makes absolutely no sense to not live according to the way that he points out. And so, as I say, I could measure how much I believe that, how much that's a head belief and how much that's a heart belief, by how I live. So Jesus came down on earth to show us how to live. And a couple of these things I've covered in previous talks, but to bring them together to say, when I look at what he came to show us, the ultimate for me, the thing that comes through all the time is how it's all about love. Everything is about love. Love for one another. We have our way of living love in this world, and it's often very limited. However, Jesus shows us that this love has to go way beyond what we see as love and where love ends. And we see this, as I've said before, in his miracles, for example, where he shows by his miracles that this love must extend even to those that we see as our enemies. And these days we're very good at having enemies, anyone who doesn't agree with us. And I say that because among the many people that Jesus worked miracles for, both Jews and pagans, he worked miracles for. There were even the miracles that he worked for example, for the servant of the Roman centurion. So he worked a miracle for the servant of an officer of the occupying army in his area. And that's not an easy thing for us to get our heads around. He also worked a miracle for one of the people who came to arrest him and take him to his death. And he knew that that death was coming. And we know this from the story about in the Garden of Gethsemane, when one of the disciples, one of the Gospels says Peter, cut the ear off one of the people that was there with his sword, and Jesus admonished him for using the sword like that, took the ear and healed this person. Now that's way beyond where we see love extending to. But Jesus goes even further than that. He shows us that even on the cross, even when they had put him to death, when he was hanging there waiting to die, he prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing." And so this forgiveness, this concern for other people went all the way to even his death and for those who put him to death. And so we see that what he's showing us is that what's required, the ultimate, is to have this love for absolutely everybody. And as I say, that's not easy for all of us, especially because very much our worldly view tells us otherwise. He shows us that we are called to be an example to those around us. We're called to bring his goodness into the world. And we see this, for example, where people would turn around and say, well, does he really have much effect in the world? And why don't we see his effect more strongly in the world? And for this, I'd like to take you back to my talk that I gave on Auschwitz and Birkenau with the Holocaust, and how people will very easily take things like the Holocaust and say, well, where was God in that? And since I say Jesus is God, where was Jesus in that event? And as I say in that talk, we find that in the official records of those two concentration camps, that they reckon they put 400,000 people to death. Of those 400,000, 205,000 were non-Jews. 165,000 were Catholics of those 205,000. And the other 40,000 were made up of Protestants and other religions, Orthodox and other religions. And so we see that God was there. He was there in the voices of those people so strongly that the regime had them put to death, even though they weren't Jews and they were meaning to exterminate Jews. And so the question becomes, where wasn't God at the time of the Holocaust? To which the answer is, God wasn't uppermost in the hearts and minds, not only of those governing the country, but of the majority of the people in that country. Otherwise, they would never have put those people in power. And so we see that God gives us free will, but very often we only want free will to suit what we want. But when it goes contrary to what we want, well, then we want to know where God is. And so, as I say, we need to look at the bigger picture. We need to look at just exactly where God does look out for us, how he calls us to actually have an active part in bringing this world about. And so when we have wars and everything else, and most people would say they don't want war, we have to stop and say, this is our attitude, that if we want something badly enough and we feel someone standing in our way, we feel justified to kill, to fight and everything, and to make life very difficult for them. And so we can't be surprised that our world is as chaotic as it is. Because you see, the whole question of God, which some people see as of little relevance in the world, is the essential question. Because to take God out of the equation is to invite chaos into your life and into the world. It's to invite chaos because if there is no God, if there is no God who points out what's right and wrong, well, then one person's opinion is as valid as another person's opinion. No one of us has some sort of superiority over the others that our opinion should prevail over theirs. And even if we may believe that they're completely wrong, they may believe that we're completely wrong. And so you lose all sense of a way of living, a way of being, because anything goes, provided it's what some person believes. And so we see just how important it is that we do have God at the helm. And so, as I said, obviously there's a whole lot more to who I see Jesus as being, but Jesus is the one for me. He is the Christ. He's the one who's brought us the full message of how we're meant to live in this world, what we're meant to bring to this world. And if we do that, how fruitful our lives will be and how much good we would have done, not only for ourselves, but for all of those we come into contact with. And may God bless you. Thank you.